Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we're relying entirely on an incredibly detailed historical record from his Wikipedia page to basically dismantle everything you think you know about one of the most famous figures of the 20th century.
Right, and I'm your resident expert for today. Our mission here is to peer behind the pop culture caricature of the ultimate aviation legend, the Red Baron.
Yeah, because it is entirely possible your primary association with him is, as a mascot on a frozen pizza box.
Exactly. Or maybe you caught that YouTube video from late 2025.
Oh, the epic rap battles of history.
That's the one, where they pitted the Red Baron against the legendary Finnish sniper Simo Häyhä. The cultural footprint is just massive.
It really is. But that fame creates this bizarre paradox, right? When someone becomes that ubiquitous, they're almost universally misunderstood.
Right, he's been flattened into this cartoonish villain flying a bright red plane.
Exactly.
Right.
But the historical reality of the man is infinitely more complex. It's much darker and, honestly, incredibly fascinating when you strip away the mythology. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin with a legend like this?
Well, we can lay out a clear blueprint for you. We're going to trace a truly surprising arc today, starting with his beginnings, where he was, factually speaking, a pretty terrible pilot.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Then we'll map his evolution into a tactical mastermind, explore the devastating psychological toll that his heavily propagandized fame took on him, and finally we're going to break down the forensic ballistics mystery surrounding his final flight.
Okay, we have to start with his origins, because he was born into a military paradigm that didn't even conceive of fighter planes.
Right, they didn't exist yet.
Exactly. Born in 1892 in Prussia into a very prominent aristocratic family. His title was Freiherr, which translates to free lord, but we commonly anglicize it to baron.
And his background was strictly traditional. In 1909, he joined an Ulan cavalry unit.
So he's riding horses.
Literally trained to ride horses into battle. It was a prestigious, highly romantic military path tied to the Prussian aristocracy. He spent his youth hunting wild boar and deer with his brothers, basically preparing for this glamorous mobile warfare.
Which completely ceased to exist the moment the First World War began.
Exactly.
By 1914, those traditional cavalry charges were just immediately chewed to pieces by entrenched machine guns and heavy artillery. So his prestigious regiment gets dismounted. They're relegated to acting as dispatch runners and field telephone operators.
Which, for a young, ambitious Prussian nobleman sitting in the mud running telephone wire, was just an unacceptable stagnation of his career.
He hated it. He expressed that frustration so clearly when the army decided to transfer him to the supply branch. He actually wrote this in his official application to transfer to the air service. He said, "I have not gone to war in order to collect cheese and eggs, but for another purpose."
I love that quote. It is the ultimate aristocratic refusal to be sidelined as a grocery clerk.
Collect cheese and eggs. It's so specific.
Right. But his request is granted. He joins the flying service in mid-1915, initially just serving as an observer before entering pilot training. And this is where the historical record sharply diverges from the myth of the natural-born ace.
Because he wasn't one.
No, not at all. What's fascinating here is that his path to greatness wasn't paved with natural talent. It was built on this rigid, almost obsessive determination.
He was actually below average.
He was. He struggled just to control the aircraft. He actually crashed during his very first flight at the controls.
Which completely shatters that natural genius trope we always see in movies.
Absolutely. The fact that the greatest ace of the war crashed his first plane shows that his lethality was a product of mechanical repetition and strict adherence to rules, not innate instinct.
And the catalyst for that lethality was mentorship, right?
Right.
He had a chance meeting with Oswald Boelcke.
Yes, essentially the father of German fighter tactics. Boelcke eventually selected Richthofen for one of the first dedicated German fighter squadrons. And Richthofen just took his obsessive drive and applied it entirely to mastering Boelcke's tactical doctrines.
And that systematic approach yielded immediate results.
Yeah.
On September 17, 1916, Richthofen scores his first confirmed kill, shooting down 2 British airmen, Lionel Morris and Tom Rees.
And we immediately see his complex sense of honor and ego emerge here.
Right, because he honored their grave by placing a stone on it. But simultaneously, he contacts a jeweler in Berlin to initiate this deeply personal tradition.
He ordered a silver cup engraved with the date and the specific type of enemy aircraft he had just shot down.
And he kept doing this.
Meticulously. He maintained this practice until he had a collection of 60 silver cups.
Why did he stop at 60? I mean, he had 80 kills.
Logistics. Blockaded Germany literally ran out of silver, and Richthofen outright refused to accept cups made from cheap base metals. He halted the tradition entirely rather than compromising on the material.
Wow. That rigid personality extended directly into his flying style, too. He was not a flashy aerobatic pilot.
No, the era had plenty of spectacular stunt flyers. Even his own brother, Lothar, who also became a highly decorated ace, was more of a daredevil.
But Richthofen, by contrast, was cold, calculating,
Yeah.
and followed the maxims of the Dicta Boelcke to the letter.
Because the tactical landscape favored that methodical approach. The Dicta Boelcke emphasized energy retention and situational awareness over acrobatic dogfighting.
He would dive from above, using the sun to blind his enemy.
Right, and if he engaged a two-seater reconnaissance plane, he explicitly trained his pilots to ignore the pilot initially and kill the observer.
The guy with the rear machine gun.
Exactly, because neutralizing the defensive armament was just the mathematical priority. He relied entirely on his squadron to cover his rear and flanks. He operated as an aerial sniper, not a gunslinger.
His effectiveness really peaked in high-stakes engagements. Like in November 1916, he goes up against the British ace, Major Leno Hawker.
A pilot Richthofen respected enough to call the British Boelcke.
Right. And the engagement was this grueling, protracted dogfight, circling lower and lower over the battlefield. Richthofen ultimately outlasted Hawker, shooting him in the back of the head as the British pilot tried to break away and cross back to friendly lines.
And that victory cemented his status as a lethal apex predator in the sky. But if you were visualizing this combat in your head right now, you are likely picturing the wrong aircraft.
Yeah, the dominant cultural image is a bright red Fokker Dr. I triplane.
The machine with the 3 stacked wings.
Exactly. But the Wikipedia documentation highlights a massive misconception there. Out of his 80 officially credited victories, only 19 were achieved in that famous triplane.
He didn't even begin flying that specific model until late in 1917. The aerodynamic advantages of the triplane, like its superior rate of climb and tight maneuverability, came way later.
His first red plane, the machine where he actually forged his terrifying reputation, was an Albatros D3 biplane.
And the paint job itself reveals crucial aspects of his psychology. When he took command of his squadron, Jastel 11, he ordered his aircraft painted glaringly red.
Entirely red.
Yes. In a combat zone where camouflage and low visibility are standard survival doctrines, making yourself the most visible object in the sky seems tactically suicidal.
Even his own mother questioned the frivolity of the decision.
But his justification to her is deeply revealing. He cited the legendary German hero Dietrich von Bern, who supposedly carried a fire-red shield into battle to project courage and force.
But beyond the mythology, he claimed a tactical empathy for the infantry. He stated, "I want to ease his hard lot in life by keeping the enemy flyers away from him."
He wanted the men looking up from the mud of the trenches to see a highly visible protector.
And he wanted the enemy to see him and experience immediate psychological intimidation. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because flying a giant red target inevitably draws concentrated enemy fire.
So his squadron had to adapt to his branding.
They began painting parts of their own Albatros fighters red to make their leaders slightly less conspicuous.
Right, turning a personal aesthetic into functional unit identification. And by the summer of 1917, he was commanding an entire fighter wing, Jagdschwader 1, and they operated with a logistical mobility that was entirely unprecedented.
How so?
They functioned much like a traveling military circus. JG-1 was a highly mobile tactical unit. They lived in tents and transported their dismantled aircraft on railroad flat cars to wherever the frontline fighting was thickest.
So because of their brightly colored aircraft, their elite status, and this nomadic deployment strategy, they earned the enduring moniker, the Flying Circus.
The tactical supremacy of the Flying Circus was devastating, particularly during the Arras Offensive in April 1917.
The British Royal Flying Corps was severely outclassed technologically and tactically during a period they grimly labeled Bloody April. Richthofen alone shot down 22 British aircraft in a single month.
Including 4 in a single day.
He was awarded the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest military honor, informally known as the Blue Max. He was elevated to the status of a national hero, a living god of the sky heavily utilized by German propaganda.
But then, the illusion of invincibility shattered.
July 6, 1917.
That date serves as the definitive pivot point of his life. During combat over Belgium, he sustained a severe head wound. A bullet struck the back of his head, splintering the bone, causing instant disorientation and inducing temporary blindness.
The fact that he survived the immediate trauma is just staggering. He somehow regained partial vision just in time to pull his albatross out of a fatal spin and execute a crash landing in friendly territory.
He required multiple surgeries to remove bone splinters from his skull.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see the devastating reality of industrialized warfare, violently stripping away the meticulously crafted hero facade.
He returned to combat duty against the strict advice of his doctors, but his personality and physical capabilities were fundamentally altered. He suffered from severe post-flight nausea, blinding headaches, and a profound, documented depression.
And that internal shift is explicitly detailed in his own writings. During his convalescence, he dictated an autobiography titled The Red Battle Flyer.
And while it was heavily censored and sanitized by the German propaganda machine to maintain national morale, raw glimpses of his psychological state made it through the editing process.
You wrote, "My father discriminates between a sportsman and a butcher. The latter shoots for fun." He described how the thrill of the hunt was satisfied for merely a quarter of an hour after destroying an enemy aircraft. He then confessed, "Only much later have I overcome my instinct and have become a butcher."
It is a staggering public admission from the German Empire's premier hero. He consciously recognized the monstrous nature of his mechanized role.
He later actively repudiated his own book, stating he was no longer so insolent in spirit. The grinding attrition of the war had completely hollowed him out.
He even detailed his living quarters in a particularly haunting passage. He had taken a massive rotary engine from a downed enemy plane and converted it into a chandelier.
He mounted electric light bulbs inside the engine cylinders. He wrote that at night, letting that light burn, the chandelier looked fantastic and weird, and it kept him awake with his thoughts.
He was literally sleeping beneath the mangled wreckage of his victims, illuminated in his dugout. It reads less like a victor's trophy and much more like a manifestation of severe trauma and survivor's guilt.
His superiors recognized his deteriorating mental state. Right. They offered him a safe administrative desk job.
Yeah, he had fulfilled his duty. He was an invaluable propaganda asset alive, and he could have comfortably sat out the remainder of the conflict.
But he refused the transfer. He stated he could not become a pensioner of his own dignity to save his life, while every poor fellow in the trenches endures his duty as I do mine.
He was entirely trapped by the mythology the state had built around him.
And the trap closes on April 21st, 1918, the final flight. The tactical situation over the Somme River in France was chaotic. It was shortly after 11:30 a.m. Richthofen observed his cousin, Wolfram, being attacked by a novice Canadian pilot named Wap May.
Richthofen immediately intervened, driving May away and initiating a pursuit. But during this pursuit, Richthofen commits a fatal tactical anomaly.
He chases this novice pilot at a dangerously low altitude, deep over enemy lines.
He abandons the altitude advantage, ignores the threat of ground fire, and breaks the very Dicta Boelcke rules that had kept him alive through 80 prior engagements.
And as he pursues May, the Canadian's flight commander, Captain Arthur Roy Brown, observes the chase. Brown initiates a high-speed dive from above to intervene, firing a burst at Richthofen before pulling up sharply to avoid a ground collision.
Richthofen evades Brown's pass, but then inexplicably resumes his tree-level pursuit of May. It is during this final low-altitude stage of the chase that a single .303 caliber bullet strikes Richthofen.
The round tears through his chest, inflicting catastrophic damage to his heart and lungs. The Red Fokker triplane stalls, enters a steep dive, and impacts a field near the village of Somme.
The sector was defended by soldiers of the Australian Imperial Force. Witnesses who secured the crash site found the aircraft's undercarriage collapsed. Inside the cockpit, Richthofen was already deceased.
The violent deceleration of the crash had thrown his face into the butts of his own machine guns, breaking his nose and fracturing his jaw.
Persistent rumors suggest his final word in the wreckage was kaput, though modern forensic historians heavily dispute that he possessed the physiological capacity to speak at all, with a shattered jaw, destroyed lungs, and a pierced heart.
He almost certainly died in the air, or upon immediate impact. So what does this all mean? The most lethal pilot of the war is dead in a mangled triplane. The historical controversy immediately became who actually fired the fatal shot.
It remains one of the most heavily analyzed forensic mysteries of the First World War. Officially, the Royal Air Force credited Captain Roy Brown with the kill.
It provided a perfect narrative for the Entente powers, the heroic Allied pilot defeating the infamous Red Baron in a classic aerial duel.
But the ballistics evidence utterly contradicts that narrative. Modern medical examiners, historians, and ballistics experts have rigorously analyzed the post-mortem reports.
The fatal bullet entered Richthofen's right underarm and exited adjacent to his left nipple.
And Captain Roy Brown was attacking from behind and above Richthofen's left side. It is a geographically and geometrically impossible angle for Brown to have fired that specific shot.
Additionally, the medical reality of the wound dictates the timeline. A bullet inflicting that level of destruction to the heart and lungs induces death in less than a minute.
Right. If Brown had inflicted that wound during his diving pass, it is physiologically impossible for Richthofen to have continued aggressively pursuing Watt-May's aircraft for up to 2 additional minutes.
The airborne pilot theory completely collapses under forensic scrutiny. The fatal shot had to originate from ground fire.
He was flying at tree level over a sector heavily defended by Australian anti-aircraft machine gunners. The most credible candidate, overwhelmingly supported by modern experts, is an Australian sergeant named Cedric Popkin.
Popkin was operating a Vickers machine gun and engaged the Baron twice, once head-on, and a second time from long range from the aircraft's right side as Richthofen banked and passed his position.
That second burst from Popkin's Vickers, firing from the right side, perfectly matches the upward trajectory of the bullet that killed him, entering the right underarm, exiting the left chest.
Another Australian gunner, Snowy Evans, is occasionally cited in theories, but his firing angles do not align with the post-mortem telemetry nearly as perfectly as Popkin's.
This raises an important question. Why was the master tactician down in the machine gun fire to begin with? We established that he coldly calculated every risk and prioritized altitude. Why was he skimming the trees over heavily defended enemy territory, fixated on a single novice plane?
The source material highlights compelling medical and environmental theories. In 1999, medical researchers published a detailed article in The Lancet arguing that Richthofen's severe brain damage from that July 1917 head wound played a primary role.
The behavior he exhibited on his final flight, extreme target fixation, loss of situational awareness, and abandonment of foundational tactical judgment, is highly consistent with patients suffering from traumatic brain injuries.
Combine a traumatic brain injury with the cumulative combat stress of leading the air war, exhaustion, and the suffocating pressure of national expectations.
There was also a critical environmental factor that day. The wind over the Somme was blowing easterly at roughly 40 kilometers per hour, contrary to the prevailing westerly winds.
As he chased May westward, he was being pushed by a massive tailwind. His ground speed was pushing 200 kilometers per hour. He was propelled past the front lines and over the heavily armed Australian positions, vastly faster than his internal timing and experience would have registered.
It was a fatal confluence of a damaged brain, immense fatigue, and an anomalous weather pattern.
The reaction from the Entente forces upon confirming his identity was profound. The Australian No. 3 Squadron, who secured his body, treated his remains with immense military respect.
Major David Blake organized a full military funeral. 6 Entente officers served as pallbearers. An armed guard of honor fired a salute, and they presented a memorial wreath inscribed to "Our gallant and worthy foe."
His remains were eventually moved from France to Berlin for a massive state funeral, and finally interred in a family plot in Wiesbaden, Germany. As you consider all this data, think about how this deep dive fundamentally shifts your perspective on historical legends.
The Red Baron wasn't a cartoon mascot, nor was he simply a fearless knight of the sky.
He was a 25-year-old cavalryman, deeply traumatized by the propaganda machine that built him, a reluctant butcher kept awake by a chandelier of wreckage, who ultimately fell victim to a fractured mind, breaking his own foundational rules of survival.
I want to leave you with one final provocative piece of the historical record to ponder. While society remembers the bright red triplane and the dramatic death, his truest legacy is entirely invisible to the public today.
Oh, so?
Decades later, during the Vietnam War, the United States Air Force initiated a comprehensive study of air combat tactics designated Project Red Baron. The findings of that specific project birthed Red Flag, which is the massive, highly advanced combat training exercise still utilized by modern militaries multiple times a year. It is incredible to consider that the tactical doctrines of a 25-year-old Prussian cavalryman from 1918 are still, at a fundamental level, hardwiring how the world's most advanced fighter pilots survive the skies right now.
The architectural influence of the Dicta Boelcke living on in modern jet fighters is a phenomenal connection. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Wikipedia archives. Keep questioning the myths around you, and we will catch you next time.